you sense the specific feeling of having not quite arrived. You did it again. You matched the energy in the room instead of bringing the one you actually walked in with. You weren't afraid. You just know, somewhere underneath the conversation, that the version of you that shows up there has a defined shape. You've been fitting yourself into it for so long that you almost don't notice the compression anymore. We're naming the dynamic nobody warns you about, the relationship that requires an older version of you to function. Those terms were set years ago. They just never got updated. There's a specific kind of relationship that simply stops working when you refuse to shrink. The care is genuine. Invitations stay warm. But when you show up as the person you've actually become, friction appears. A subtle recalibration happens in the room. A kind of confusion settles over the conversation. You learned a long time ago how to read that signal and respond to it. So you respond. You make yourself a little more available than you actually are. You get quieter. The friction dissolves. The relationship returns to its comfortable temperature. What you don't name is that the price of that temperature is you. I spent years in a relationship like this. I genuinely loved this person. There was no defining moment of betrayal. I simply developed a slow awareness that the version of me showing up in those conversations was entirely disconnected from the version I had worked to become. I arrived with a smaller opinion and an apologetic posture. I kept doing it because the relationship mattered. I told myself care meant accommodation. What I eventually saw was the truth. I had mistaken accommodating the relationship's terms for accommodating the actual person. Those terms set long ago by a version of me who needed something that I no longer needed for a version of them they may have already grown past too. The relationship was frozen at that earlier date. Every time I showed up as the current version, the gap between who I'd become and who that relationship knew me to be got harder to close without someone acknowledging it out loud. If you flinched just now thinking of someone specific, pay attention to that. The identity underneath this pattern learned early on that being less certain made you safer to be around. It decided the relationship was worth more than the space you were taking up inside it. It equated care with shrinking when the room asks you to. That belief kept something intact that mattered at the time. Problem is, it's still running now in a life where you have already changed. When this shifts, you stop performing the shape the relationship was built around. You begin saying something true in a room where you used to edit it out. And you stay present while the room adjusts. Conversation takes longer than it used to because you're actually in it now. These moments force the relationship to renegotiate. Many will find a new temperature where both people have been updated. The ones that can't update offer you critical information. You stop arriving as the older version on purpose. You do this because the cost of fitting yourself into that shape is finally visible to you. Once you see that cost, pretending ignorance no longer an option. Carry this one into your day. In the relationship you were just thinking about, which version of you shows up there? And is that version current? If this episode named a reality you have been sensing but avoiding, the no-cost identity clarity call is designed for exactly this threshold. We'll use the time to get clear on what you have already become and expose the exact cost of pretending you haven't. The link to claim your time, it's in the show notes. Tomorrow, me go one layer deeper. If some relationships require your old self to survive, we need to examine what happens inside you when you decide to stop providing it. The resistance you face next comes from the inside. With strength and heart, I'm Sean Michael. Stay close. We spend a lot of time on this show talking about the threshold, the space between the identity that got you here and the one required for the new ground. You're listening to this because something in your current architecture is fracturing. You're running the performer playbook or the striver protocol, and it's costing you an immense amount of energy to maintain the facade. The external results are there, but the internal friction, it's burning you out. Most people will let this episode end and go right back into the performance. They'll put the mask back on for their next Zoom meeting and keep relying on the identity that's actively caging them. I'm looking for the leader who's done performing. If you're ready to look at the structural identity collapse happening beneath the surface, we need to map your architecture. Go to the link in the show notes, book your identity clarity call. We'll identify the exact survival identity running your calendar and begin the shift into conscious leadership. Stop performing, start becoming.